I better sort it. This is the first time I've played this game, so and I am a Gen Xer, so I'm going to be a bit rusty. Sorry, I've a bit of a cold, so my nose will be a bit. Game mode, action mode. Confirm. I don't know anything about this game. I've heard it's a bit like Dark Souls. Oh, I better turn that down. Might be able to hear me. Yeah, supposedly this is like a samurai Dark Souls, but oh, pre-order. I want to complete the first one first before I buy in the next one. Anyway, an election's just happened. The Labour Party filled themselves with a load of Marxist losers for the past probably 5 years. They went Marxist mad. I'm not a Marxist at all. I'm a social libertarian. I like things like the safety net and you know, human rights, workers' rights, things like that, but I don't believe in hard party politics. I don't believe in having a system where you have to be constantly praising your society. I find it all a little bit ridiculous. I'm not a big fan of a lot of socialism, particularly the redder it becomes, the more moronic it becomes, and the less about actual caring about people. The caring about people usually becomes an excuse for them to start doing things like locking people up. Also, I don't believe that we should eat the rich. I think there should be limitations put on how much money people can earn, so you don't end up with a society where one person has all of the power through money, but this idea that we're supposed to tax all the rich people into oblivion, I find a bit unbelievable. I think most of the people in a world like we've got today would just pull all their money out of the country, and the pound will die. You know, I've seen this happen with Zimbabwe. Went a little bit over red under Mugabe, and all of the people who had wealth basically left the country. And Zimbabwe is now like a third world country, when at one time, when it was imperial, it was one of the richest parts of Africa, next to South Africa. But today it's got some of the worst survival rates for anyone. So that's a really bad state of affairs. That's the problem I've always had with Marxism anyway. It doesn't really come across as being the most sort of sensible. It all works great on paper, but when oh. It all seems to be locked. Oh, I wonder if I can do that on the door. No. Ooh. Aha! Ooh. Oh shit. Dying straight away. Oh. Yeah, this is like Dead Souls. I wonder if I can sneak up behind him. To target people.
Hey! What are you doing?
Got ya. Hello. Switch modes, it's gestures. Equipment. Equipment. Right. Melee weapon. Bastard sword. Aha. That's where it came from. Ah. There we go.
I guess yourself was your only savior.
Anyway, as I was saying about the Labour Party took a massive swing to the left. I can understand what the attraction was. I just think that it was really badly placed. I never really had a lot of faith in Jeremy Corbyn. He always came across as a bit of a know-it-all twat. You know, I've always sort of wanted something like a utopian society, but Corbyn always came across as being a little bit sort of not really being able to explain exactly what he wanted. It all seemed to be sort of a slightly nebulous plan about turning the UK into something like it was in the 1970s. And I'm not really fooled by people who sort of harken back to some sort of magic period when back in the 70s things being wonderful, because really that's nonsense, because in the 1970s we had an economy that went out of control. Just it was a complete mess, really. What do I do now? What's my status? Equipment. Torso. Oh, very swank. Yeah, so Jeremy Corbyn, I always thought was a flip-flopper. He had a tendency to not really say what he wanted, which made things pretty confusing. You know, I'm also a Remainer. I don't believe Brexit is even possible. I think people who have been making wild claims about it are full of shit. The worst being people like Nigel Farage, who have made lots of ridiculously bold claims about how Brexit would be achievable, and most of it is nebulous rubbish that doesn't actually fit any facts. Unfortunately, in the UK, our press has become pretty awful. They treat lunatics, when it comes to Brexit, they take lunatics' ideas as equal to professionals, which is just ridiculous. Damn! Bollocks. I've got quite far then. I forgot the parry button. Yeah. That's a parry. Yeah, so we've had terrible press. Corbyn has been dreadful when it comes to arguing his case. The Labour Party got all of these groups like Momentum and Unity involved. I'm partially pro unions and unionisation, but the problem in the past has been that unions have got greedy. As any system in place, if people think they can get something for free, sometimes they'll go too far. And all governments can go too far when it comes down to it. You know, you can go too far the other way, like America has, where workers have got barely any sensible rights. Oh. Ah, you bastard! Where did he come from? Oh. Yeah, you can go too far and you can have workers with virtually no rights. You know, everything has to be balanced and in moderation. Unfortunately, like I said, people go too far. They'll, especially on the left wing, you've got people like Chapo Trap House, who I've mentioned in the title because they are on Cloud Cuckoo Land. I listen to their podcast. I'm even a Patreon, but I might not be for much longer because they've said some really stupid shit recently. Basically, their current argument is that the loss of the election wasn't down to Corbyn being pretty terrible. It was all to do with the Remainers, people like me. And I've heard even more ludicrous stuff online, especially on Facebook, that somehow it's the Green Party's fault for the loss. That somehow Corbyn, who isn't an environmentalist, he's at most a human rights advocate, and a bloke who believes in peace and things like that. He is not an environmentalist at all. His Green New Deal stuff was basically poached from the Green Party. So that bollocks is going on at the moment, that somehow the Green Party stole votes from the Labour Party, and it's really their fault. When the reality is, what really killed the Labour Party was Brexit, because Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit plan was really, really bad. I tried to stay positive with it, but it just came across as rubbish. Mainly because he couldn't really decide what he wanted. Brexit's biggest problem has been that, unlike, say, previous things that can divide a party, oh no! Bastard! You know, something like wars. Sometimes people will take sides over wars. I back in 2005 supported the Liberal Democrats, and I did again in 2010, because they were the only anti-war party at the time, apart from the Green Party. And because the Labour Party under Tony Blair was really pro-war, and so were the Tories. So, you know, I believe in wars if they're a sensible conflict, but what we know now about particularly Afghanistan is it was all bullshit, that it had nothing to do with terrorism or the prevention of terrorism. It was all in the end about oil and an oil deals. It wasn't at all about what they said it was. Let's see. You know, in the past, well, very famously, the Labour Party in the 1960s wouldn't support America over Vietnam. You know, they believed it wasn't a justifiable conflict for the UK. Australia did, though. That they and there were British soldiers who volunteered to be in the conflict, but oh.
Huh?
Gotcha. Oh, can't get his weapon. Damn. Right. 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 What was I talking about? Oh yeah. So yeah, the Labour Party have made big stands in the past, but there's always been this ridiculous romanticism that I've come across over the years about the Labour Party, and they have a tendency to try and take over movements. Whoa. I suppose that's a saving point. Yeah, like they sort of took over every sort of left-wing sort of movement you could sort of think of would be slightly dominated by Labour, and they appeal to students and things like that. I can understand why, but sometimes it does feel like they're just doing it to get people's votes. It's a little bit like when the right wing all sort of claim that they're for the soldiers, but then they'll sort of cut their wages and shit like that, you know. They play the patriotism, but sometimes it's just bullshit that they're just doing it because they want their votes. But you know, well, that's part of being a politician. But yeah, the left wing have sort of taken on things. Sometimes the Labour Party have done the right thing when it comes to criminal justice. But I do like, you know, back in the 60s, being gay not a crime anymore because I'm bisexual. But there have been, particularly in the last, I'd say 20 years, times when I thought that they've been taking on things to
Indeed, the pirates have served their purpose.
The hell's
The
that?
death of the leader of Japan will spark a war and a wonderful opportunity to acquire more Amrita.
Once tomorrow's execution takes place,
Yeah, so
we will get our hands on a compass that
you know,
will lead us to
they'll
Amrita.
pretend that they're right on till they get into power, and then they have a tendency to change their mind.
Perhaps even the world.
The day when England
You know,
reigns supreme
back in the 90s with Tony Blair,
But our
there was
thinks of Amrita
this
as gold or gemstones.
push to get as many working class people on side, but then Tony Blair sort of started being a bit nasty with the unions. Yeah, so the Labour Party's been a bit two-faced as well in the past. That when they're outside power, they're all for certain rights, but then when they get into power, they sort of change their mind. Silly-looking hat. Yeah. Anyway, so the election just sort of happened, and a lot of stupid people... Oh, hello, we've got some message here. Remember the expenses scandal? Yeah, I remember that, but, you know, that Corbyn wasn't really involved in that. Mostly there were what are known as champagne socialists were heavily involved in that. So were a lot of Tories, but You know, basically, if someone's, like I was saying earlier, if someone offers you something for nothing, you're going to take it. The unions were just as greedy for a while, and then basically everything went to shite for them. Oh. You know, having free stuff is great if someone isn't greedy, but unfortunately, greed is part of the human condition. And anyone's capable of it. I've seen people using the benefit system who don't go crazy, but I've also met people who were earning more money on benefits than I earn doing my 70-hour job. So it's not always as clear cut as people wish it was. But gotcha. Yeah, doing much better now. Where was I? Oh! Ah! I need to change memory. Right. Nice. Yeah, so I was getting completely off subject. So basically the elections happened. Labour did incredibly badly, mainly because, well, I was complaining about it months ago, that the Labour Party needed to take a side on Brexit. Being the party that's supposed to be liberal and right on and all this stuff, they should have gone with Remain. Instead, because Jeremy Corbyn has never been a fan of Europe, he instead went for not being able to decide which side he wanted to be on, which was a major mistake, and it was very confusing supposedly to try and sell to people. You know, I've watched videos of Paul Mason talking about how when he tried to go to doorsteps, people were confused over Brexit's position. You know, were they in or out on Brexit? And then finally, Jeremy Corbyn, after the resignation of Tom Watson, who was pro-Remain, he then came up with, like, the last sort of 2 months, the plan of having sort of his cake and eating it type idea of having coming up with his own Brexit plan, which would be a soft Brexit, and having a second referendum, and with the option of getting rid of Brexit completely, which was really confusing to explain to anyone. I was completely confused when I first heard it, and I literally had to read the bill to understand what he was getting at. And really what it was he knew that there were, particularly people in the north, it's not a completely straight down the middle divide between pro-Brexit and pro-Remain, but there were pro-Brexiteers who were from the north. Oh, shite. And then you had Brexiteers still on the railway, yes. There were people who were pro-Brexit and people who were anti-Brexit, but unfortunately, because there wasn't 100% Tories who were wanting out of Europe, and there weren't 100% Labour voters who wanted to remain. So both parties had their problems. The Tory party were literally throwing people out of Parliament for being and thrown out of the actual Parliament itself, the Parliament group. For having an opposing view to the Prime Minister, and over this year we've had 2 Prime Ministers. We've had Boris Johnson literally only for 4 months, and he's just terrible. You know, it's pretty amazing that for a while no one liked either leader of either party, which is a big problem, especially when Labour were literally forced into having an election. When I first heard about them talking about having an election, I thought it was a really bad idea that Labour shouldn't have gone along with at all. They should have waited and waited and waited till at least April. But then the Tories were threatening to have a no-deal Brexit, which is an even worse idea, which they're already saying that they're going to put back on the table, which is just... Any economist in the world will tell you the plan that the Tories have as a no-deal Brexit is completely unworkable, will probably cause what's known as a run on the pound, which is going to completely devalue the pound globally. No-deal Brexit is insanity. Oh, yes. I see it. Insanity, yeah. It's basically a really stupid idea where we go to what's known as World Trade Rules. But because World Trade Rules hasn't been explained very well on purpose to the public, because it's a really stupid idea, when you look at countries that have gone to World Trade Organization rules in the past, there have been places like Bolivia and Argentina, and both times they didn't get great deals out of it. And those countries are much bigger than the UK. Look. Damn! But like I was saying earlier, the biggest problem is that we've got a very skewed press in the UK now, who, well, I was talking to a bloke earlier about it, that they'll pitch an idiot and a person who knows what they're talking about, and they'll give them the same space. You know, this is like having a doctor and an anti-vaxxer and arguing the case for why we should have vaccination for children, and giving exactly the same amount of time to the anti-vaxxer. It's bonkers. It's something that really, I think most of the problem of why we have all of this bullshit on the news and why everything's become so crazy is basically because of 24-hour news. BBC News 24 has pretty much ruined the reputation of the BBC for me, because they will have anyone on it. I remember they literally gave airtime much more than even Labour to people like Nigel Farage, who wasn't even running for a seat. But I already predict doom and gloom happening there. I don't think that Farage is going to be... well, my personal view now, because of the major loss, and because Boris Johnson got a huge majority, because Jeremy Corbyn was so crap. He was embarrassingly crap. Yeah, I personally think that Brexit might not even happen now. it's the crazy thing that that Boris Johnson's got to get it through, but the problem is that Boris Johnson is a terrible politician who really sort of doesn't know what he's talking about pretty much most of the time. He lies constantly. That's something that is another reason why the British press has really gone down in my estimations, is because they've allowed Boris Johnson to literally lie to their face so many times now. Also, there's evidence that people in the BBC were sort of negative towards the Labour Party from the start, which sort of made it a bit pointless. Oh, what was that? Ooh, he's more powerful. Ooh. Oh. Ooh. Well, there's this talk that Boris Johnson plays at being a buffoon. I think he is a buffoon. I think I've seen him do interviews, particularly during the election, where he came across as being drunk. And it wasn't like an act of being drunk. He looked like... supposedly he's got a history of being an alcoholic. And I think he was drunk quite a bit. You know, there was that thing with the journalist trying to show him a photo on a phone, and he looked a little bit half cut then. Oh, bugger! Yeah, I think that Boris Johnson's probably not going to last the year. You know, well, not this year, next year. He's put all of these promises about Brexit, that he's going to get it done, and he'll be this sort of, you know, he'll tell Europe what he wants and they'll have to follow, and it's such a load of nonsense. The idea that Boris Johnson on his own is going to be able to convince the French that they need to follow what he says, it's laughable. It's also kind of crazy. It's one of the theories why I think that he's full of shit is basically because a lot of what he says doesn't really sound confident. It sounds like the sort of he'll say it to his gang, but when it comes down to actually talking to Europeans, well, there was that a couple of months ago. He went to, I think it was Strasbourg, and his talk with European representatives didn't go very well. And afterwards he was supposed to have been having a telephone, talking to the press. He was supposed to have a meet with the press, but he chickened out. And the press was still there, but they were talking to the European bloke, and Boris Johnson had scarpered. You know, I would have had sort of certainty had it been someone like David Cameron as Prime Minister, but Boris Johnson's so flaky, and he has a history of resigning when it gets too hot. He's resigned over some really stupid things as well, like he's had affairs with people who are supposed to be his like secretary, and there was a scandal that would have killed him if he'd still been London Mayor, when it turned out that he'd used public money to support a woman he was sleeping with, who was running some sort of school for pole dancing, which was pretty weird. Which was made all the more strange, and it's something that I don't understand why Corbyn didn't go after harder. Part of my major problem with Jeremy Corbyn was that he didn't act like a politician at all, which was a really stupid thing. Oh, that's close. You know, a sensible politician would have probably gone after Johnson on broken. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Oh, I've missed something. Yeah, Johnson's private life is pretty... at the same time he had his... he was using public funds with this... this woman with the pole dancing stuff. He was also married, and his current girlfriend, who isn't even allowed in America with him, for some reason. She was his personal assistant, and on top of that being... basically you have 3 women on the go at the same time, which for a bloke who looks like Boris Johnson's pretty amazing, I suppose. But it's still something that, you know, it's kind of, you know, the Prime Minister of the country is basically a womanising drunk. And Britain over probably the last 3 years has become the laughing stock of the world. You know, any sensible person as well, if they were in government, would ban Donald Trump from the UK. Because he's cringingly awful. He's just about the worst person who's ever been in charge of anything. I think the only person who I've seen on the international stage who's worse than him, who's the head of a democracy, was Silvio Berlusconi. Mr. Bunga Bunga parties, if anyone remembers. Ooh, yeah. I'm not doing stats. Maybe I'll open the stats. Right, so where was... Oh yeah, I was talking about how terrible Donald Trump is. So Boris Johnson's been pretty hilariously bad. Anyone else I think that they've had as leader, even someone like Gordon Brown could have easily trounced him. But because Corbyn had this weird plan that he wasn't very clear on, he did terrible. And his loss is probably one of the worst I've ever seen in my lifetime. I've been told that 1983 was worse, but I was sort of about 8 at the time, so I didn't know. No, I wasn't 8. I was. Oh yeah, I was 8 years old when that happened, which was pretty cringingly awful. But you know, that was because Margaret Thatcher was really, really effective, and also the leader at the time, Michael Foot, he, like Corbyn, wasn't very good at public speaking. I have met Michael Foot actually many, many years ago when I was on a support the miners walk in London. Miners as in mining miners, not children miners. Ooh. I can beat him. Got him! Aha! Great. Right. Whew. Aha! Right, now to kill the other one. Yeah, so, you know, Michael Foot though, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, he was like a real sort of hard man when he was a younger man. He very famously in the 30s was fighting the Nazis. And not the soldier Nazis, the black shirt Nazis. But because fascism almost took over part of London in the UK a couple of times. You know, I know we had a war with Germany, but there were Nazis here. Yeah. See if I get any more equipment. Oswald Mosley, yeah. Well, one of the most amazing stories I've ever read about the 1930s in London, one of the biggest heroes that no one had actually known he was a hero, was Vidal Sassoon, who was an anti-fascist. The bloke who later on formed a hairdressing empire. Oh great, save spot. Christ, this is like Dark Souls. I didn't realise the castle would be this big.
monsters like that to fight wars.
Guess they got no more use for us. His body just split in two. Oh God! You wanted to kill me?
Striking when the opponent is down and helpless. That's what they're trying to do to all of us who fought for Queen and country.
These people were tortured to death from the looks of them. Not very nice. Gotcha, you bastard! So, this major defeat of the Labour Party, it might not be as bad as everyone thinks. It looks really bad, but as I've been sort of following stuff at the moment, Boris Johnson's not as powerful as he thinks he is. He's got a majority that's big, yes, but that doesn't solve the problem of sort of having to be in charge when Brexit happens. And if Brexit goes really, really badly, like every sensible person has said it will. Oh shit. Oh, you bastard. Ah. Damn it. Yeah, if Brexit goes really badly, it could put the Tory party out of power for 20 years. You know, it's not a simple case of yikes. Oh, balls. The wrong weapon. I better go back to that axe. You know, a major sort of economic fuck up that could happen is, like I said, the run on the pound. That's pretty likely. The other one could be that if we go to world trade rules, because people have been lied to that this is somehow wonderful, that it wouldn't hurt our economy, and it does hurt our economy, and lots of people, particularly in the business world, lose a load of money. That could also completely destroy the Tories. So this idea that they're big winners isn't as great as it's being painted as. But you won't really hear that from a lot of the press because unfortunately the press in the UK especially has been dominated by the right wing, and the right wing have a tendency to lie a lot. Aha! Learn to dodge. Wasn't as hard as I thought it'd be. Oh, hello, who's this?
It's you. The man with the guardian spirit.
Oh dear.
If I die, the secret of the stones dies with me.
Let me show you what these stones can do.
Oh, it's going to be one of those, is it? Where I've got to kill him twice.
Execution.
Oh. Ah. Whoa! Oh, I couldn't dodge! Bollocks. Oh, bollocks! All the way upstairs and kill that bugger again and then get the bloody... This is why I gave up on Bloodborne. I was so sick and tired of having to go through the same level again and again and again. Oh, fart! Yeah, The thing that really peed me off though about the whole election was I voted Labour because in my local area I was going to vote Liberal Democrat, but then people were saying about tactical voting, and I know a fella on Facebook who is a left-wing comedian, and he was saying that he didn't want to vote Liberal Democrat, but because of tactical reason versions he'd be willing to swap with someone. So I said, okay, I'll vote tactically Labour, you vote Liberal Democrat. So that's what happened. And then I listened in on Chapo Trap House, and first they were saying that all Remainers were perverts for some reason, and now they're trying to blame Remainers for the loss, that somehow it wasn't Corbyn was just terrible and he lost the support of 2 million votes, which is pretty much how bad it got for him. There's even evidence now that it was he got 2 million extra votes at the last election, mainly from Remainers, because people assumed, oh well, the Tories are pro-Brexit, therefore the Labour Party, logically being the opposition party, would be pro-Remaining. But then Corbyn wasn't very clear about that, which sort of made me think, well, what the hell's he the leader of the opposition if he's not willing to oppose the actual government? There was even a point where supposedly he was doing backroom deals with Theresa May to try and push through Brexit, which that was like almost the icing on the cake. That's when I was considering voting Liberal Democrat, because I thought, what's the point in being the head of the opposition party if you're not opposed to the views of the government? Oh shit. Oh, bugger off! One slash and I pressed the bloody move and I didn't move. I wonder if I can just run past those two blokes upstairs. Where's this guy? There's another body.
Damn! I made it all this way for nothing? Oh, I've got to do something. If I jump...
Nice! I don't have to bother with that arsehole in the dining room. Nice. Oh, fuck no! Oh, come on. I want to get to the samurai stuff. I don't want to be running around this blooming Middle Ages castle. Reason why I bought the game. Maybe. Ooh. Yeah, so Chapo Trap House, basically, they don't really seem to know what they're talking about half the time when it comes to British politics, because they don't really understand that they seem to think of it like American politics, where, you know, maximum amount of votes, like popular vote, all this stuff. That's not the system in the UK with first past the post. You know, over the country, the Green Party got more votes than oh God! Oh, that wasn't fair. Damn it. Ow! Gotta kill some of these buggers because I'm gonna need their medicine. I'm actually extremely tempted to give up politics for 2020. I think it's really what's going to happen with Boris is going to be too funny to actually want to pay much attention, because I've got a feeling he's going to try and be Tony Blair, and then when that doesn't work he'll try and be Margaret Thatcher, and in both ways he'll probably completely fail. Well, those two are too hard to beat. I'll have to go upstairs. What's been actually extremely funny to me has been the reaction of a lot of Brexiteers who I know on Facebook groups, who have been saying to me since the election that somehow Boris Johnson will keep his word on everything. I said, he spent the whole election lying. and now he's gonna completely change now he's in power. So all of the times that he was lying before the election and lying during the election, all that's going to be forgotten. That he's going to turn over a new leaf all of a sudden and be super wonderful and honest and not bullshit to everyone. Oh, it's gone up to 96. Ooh, better helmet. And some pretty sturdy trousers, good, but not so much damage. Go upstairs. What? Ow. Still, at least it's not as bad as Bloodborne. When I first started playing Bloodborne, I was literally rage quitting. It was so frustrating. That first playthrough, when you really don't know what you're doing, you don't understand, you know, how to do deflections. Oh, fart. There's a very good, I think they're called Navinia or something like that. They're like a sort of left-wing YouTube channel, and I had an interview with the ex-BBC journalist Paul Mason, and he was talking about exactly where the failures came with Corbyn, and he's actually pretty honest about it. Which was pretty refreshing, because the amount of people who've bullshitted. There's, I don't know if you've ever heard of Tim Pool, who is this absolutely dreadful, he calls himself a journalist, but he's not really a journalist, from America, and he was making claims that because the election failed in the UK, that means that any election anywhere else in the world is going to be affected. So basically America, Bernie Sanders is going to lose because Jeremy Corbyn lose. And I'm like, they're not even comparable. Oh, fuck! The UK Conservative Party is the equal of the American Democrat Party. The American Democrat Party is a centre-right party. It's not a left-wing party at all. There are left-wing people in the Democrats, but their party isn't a left-wing party. It's a centrist party. Oh! I put up defence and it didn't defend. Supposedly the new Star Wars game is much like this, with the sort of frustration where you die. You can get killed by a stormtrooper if you attack them in the wrong way. And out of character, the stormtroopers in this Star Wars game actually know how to shoot at people. At some point I'm going to do a stream of Battlefront 2 because I finally got it in a sale. They had the Black Friday sale and I spent a lot of money. I got some really good bargains. I got what was it? New Dawn, the Far Cry follow-up. Annoyingly, they still got elements in that game from Blood Dragon, but they won't release Blood Dragon on the bloody PlayStation 4, which is really annoying because that's my favourite Far Cry game. Well, I say my favourite Far Cry game in the whole series is Far Cry Primal, but that's because of all the animals in it. you know, no game's given me more pleasure than being able to ride around on a saber-toothed tiger. Oh, bollocks! I need to remember that. I keep forgetting to put up defense. One game I've definitely got to get at some point is that Hideo Kojima one, Death Stranding, because from what I've seen of it, I'd really love it. I love super weird sci-fi, especially if it's lonely super weird sci-fi. Because I'm a big Mads Magnuson fan. Mads Mikkelsen. Much better. Six. Better weaponry. Ooh, better. Like that. Last go. But don't do this. I want to have a go at some of the other games. Because I've been doing 12-hour shifts all week, and this is the first day where I've been able to actually come home and play a game instead of come home, watch a little bit of Netflix, go to bed to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Right, that's it. Anyway, toodaloo. I may do another stream at some point in the near future.